Miranda Spivack. I used to be a reporter and editor at the Washington Post. I've spent the last 5 years as a freelancer, most recently for Reveal from the Center for Investigative Reporting, which is, as you may know, an NPR program that's on NPR. I actually have written for their website. And I did a series for them called State Secrets, and I'll give you all this later, but and it was a 5-part series about how state and local governments are actually becoming more and more secretive despite technology, despite digital data being available, all kinds of things. And I'm based in DC, and I got sort of interested in this because I worked always in local news at the Post and had a terrible time in one jurisdiction that I was covering, where I think there was a lawyer there whose full-time job was to make my job miserable. You probably have had that experience with some public official or somebody in a bureaucracy somewhere. And I just started to learn a lot about open records and documents, and found out that Maryland, where I live and work, and the state I was covering, has actually one of the worst public records laws in the country. And that's because if you make an application, if you ask for something, first of all, they don't have to give it to you right off the bat, and they can wait 30 days, which in the news business is death. It's really. So I started looking around the country and ended up building a database, which I will also give you a link to. And it was hosted by the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, because I created this database with students from Marquette, and basically we looked at all 50 states, and it's probably a little out of date now, so if you look at your state and tell me that there's something that's out of date, let me know. But it basically looked at everything from waiting times to fees to all the different barriers, frankly, that are built into the law. A lot of you, I think, were in Denise Mallon's presentation on investigative reporting on a shoestring, and one of the things that she spoke about was just sort of, the high bar, I think, to getting public documents. And she talked about lawyers, and I'm like, I've worked at small news organizations too. I was lucky at the Post. We have great lawyers, and they went to bat for us, but most people don't have that luxury. And so, I looked around as I was building this database, looked around the country to see how many states had public records ombudsmen or public access ombudsmen. It's actually very few. And in fact, Illinois, where we are, is one of those states that has it. And this story that just appeared, I think, today, basically says it's been absolutely nothing. It's done absolutely no good. So if you're looking around for a place where you could get help, free help from your government, you can see if you have a public access ombudsman, but then you're also probably need to do a story like this, which actually looks at the record of this ombudsman and solving the problem. So just a little bit more bad news that I'm sure you're not surprised by. So what I wanted to do here is, is start out with what to look for. Basically, if something is enforced, a law, inspected, the food service in the public school, or a restaurant, or a nursing home, if it's licensed, that includes pet owners, except in the state of Utah, which is exempted the list of pet owners from public disclosure. God knows why, but there you go. Driver's licenses, voter registration, etc. There's probably a public record. So you should assume that that's something you should be able to get. A lot of states are better than Maryland. They give you a 10-day waiting period. But I would go in and just say, I want this record. I think one of the things that's actually gone on, I think somebody mentioned FOIA fatigue in the last meeting, is that there's been a decline in what I would call really just basic beat reporting, which is that the clerk of the court, the clerk of the county council, Those people know everything, and they know where every document is, and they know what they have. And, you know, this is, I mean, I think you all are much more on the front lines, say, than the local news staff at the Washington Post, where I worked for 15 years, and as an editor was forever handling reporters to get out of the office and talk to people. But I think that that is still really your first line, which is ask for it. Ask for it in person. Don't send an email. Go in and ask for it, and just say, you know, and if they won't give it to you on the spot, ask them why. Ask them how long it'll take. Find out what they keep. And in fact, go do this before you need something. I mean, this is basic journalism, if you ask me, but I think it's a lost art in many ways. And so that would be the first thing I would do. You don't have to write an email. You don't have to do a formal request. Just go in and ask for it. The police department should be able to give you, and they're among the worst, depending on where you live, but should be able to give you an accident report. They should be able to give you an arrest report. And that when I started out in journalism, which I don't want to tell you how long ago that was, but it's been a while, and I was in Portland, Maine, where, as a reporter, I would go into the police department at night, because I was on the night beat, and they had a log. And I looked at the log, and then I'd say, okay, well, that case sounds interesting. Can I see the report? And they would give it to me. This is like gone. And part of it is because I think journalists aren't demanding it. You have to train public officials to do their duty. Half of them don't even know what their obligations are. And so, you know, my approach is really to try to go in with the soft touch first, you know, and just say, hey, you know, I want this. Can you help me? What else do you keep records of? Where do I find them? What's your record retention schedule? Do you all know what that is? I mean, they're all, pretty much every public agency under law, either local or state, is required to keep records for a certain amount of time. This is becoming a big deal with police videos, for example. How long do they have to keep them? They're all, police departments are saying, you know, they're clogging up their systems. Of course, they don't actually keep them. It's held by a contractor. They won't tell you that. But anyway, there's a record retention requirement for every document that they have. Expense accounts, you know, salary lists, payroll, all of that. They need to keep it. You need to find out how long they need to keep it, and you should have just asked. They know. So federal and state FOIA cover a lot of stuff. Calendars are really important. I fought for months with a local government outside of Washington over the executive's calendar. So, you know, just give it to me now so I know who he's meeting with, and then I can, of course, cross-check it with his campaign finance, which is what I wanted to do. And, you know, they would like go through and scour it and cut stuff out of it, redact stuff, and then give it to me like 2 weeks later. So, you know, there's a lack of currency about that. But so, and some public officials actually publish their calendars online, which is a nice thing to do. But you can ask for that. Texts and emails are just, you know, that should all be public. And when the city council is up there texting each other, which they shouldn't be doing because that actually constitutes a meeting that they're not disclosing to you, even as they're meeting. You know, they're actually deciding what they're going to vote on, or they've decided it in an email or some kind of serial email that technically isn't a quorum, but, you know, is really not a good practice. But all of that you should be able to get. And you know, you should, Denise talked about having a schedule, and I think this is right. You should routinely go in to government bodies and just say, okay, it's the first Monday of the month. I want, you know, all the emails about your contract, you know, this contract, or you know, just get them trained that, you know, they need to give this to you, and it's their obligation, and it doesn't have to be a FOIA. Of course, that doesn't always work. But, you know, there are a lot of documents that you should be able to get, and you should be able to get them easily. So that's my first thing, is get to know the record, the people who keep the records, get to know the record retention schedule, do this face-to-face. I mean, push young reporters out. You know, they want to text and they want to email. It just makes me crazy, to be honest with you. And I've been teaching also, and, you know, students will like say, well, I sent an email 3 days ago to that person and they didn't respond. His office is, 3 blocks from here. Just walk in. I mean, I can't say enough about that.
Can I ask a question about emails? You mentioned asking for all the emails regarding this contract. Is that how you would ask? Or would you ask for a certain time period?
I think it depends. One of the things about emails is that a lot of these local governments have actually been starved by their budget people or by the appropriators if it's a state government. And so their technology is actually not up to date, and which is interesting in and of itself. And that allows them to say, we can't do a search for that. It's hard for us to search for that. So one thing you want to do is talk to them about what they can search for. Try to understand what it is. So if there's a controversial or interesting contract, yes, I would be very specific. I would say, you guys are, you've let a contract to so-and-so for broadband. I'd like to see all the emails maybe from this date to this, when they started debating it to this date. I mean, help them out and get them to help you out to narrow the request. Because the easiest thing for them to say to you is your request is too broad. And they could be right. Partly because they don't have the technology.
Thank you.
Just real quick on that, I've had some recent success asking for email logs, which I had never asked for before, but like in Chicago, I forwarded the IT department and they gave me a log of emails rather than the emails themselves. So then you can go through and say, I want this. But one question I had that I've wanted to ask for a long time is, I've always been kind of suspicious of FOIA. I mean, these are still human beings who have to go through and give you stuff.
Right.
I mean, do you have any indication of whether they're really giving you anything? Yeah. Will we ever know? Or
it's the $1 million question with FOIA. I covered a story. It's in this State Secret series in Montgomery County, Maryland, where a community group asked the government for for emails about a deal where they had quietly decided to lease a field that was being farmed by an organic farmer. Now they're going to lease it to a soccer club. And the neighborhood didn't want that, probably for traffic reasons, but it became a big deal. Anyway, on the first round, the county government gave them a bunch of emails, and these people, I think, knew enough about the issue that they thought stuff was missing. And they had to go to court, though, and they were pretty well financed. They spent over $100,000 on this lawsuit, which is crazy and not something news organizations can do. But they did go to court, and the judge ordered the county to look again, and lo and behold, there was more stuff. I don't want to be deeply cynical, but I am. And, I think, there's some people who, in government, who take Public Information Act requests very, very seriously. Partly because, they're on the hook if they screw it up. Partly because they actually believe that this should be, those are the people you want to find, and you want to get them to help you as much as possible. And that does involve a conversation. What's the best way for me to ask for this? How can I narrow my request without making it so onerous for you, but then I'm going to get everything I need? There are many people in state and local and federal government who are honestly very concerned about this. But you got to find those people, and that comes from great people, of course. So, just a list of what is that? Subject to disclosure, which, as far as I'm concerned, is just about everything in that government touches. Obviously, meetings should have minutes, and so, some governments will post them online, but some do not. You should be able to get those, and you might, if you covered the meeting, or somebody covered the meeting, it might be interesting to compare the minutes to what you saw happening. Contracts are huge, and so much government function is now being contracted out that it's really important to look at what your local government is spending and who they're spending it on, and if it's the brother-in-law of the mayor, that would be worth knowing who got that contract, taking these companies and Googling them as much as you can to see who the board members are, who the principals are. Yeah.
I'm a public, I'm a brand new reporter. No,
Go for it.
That's great. I know nothing, but I'm having a problem in my locality where I'm walking in certain places and they're saying private sessions. And so
private session in a public building, right?
Exactly. So I guess my question is, when do they have the right to have their private?
Yeah, that's, the whole open meetings thing is like a whole nother dimension to this. But I will just say briefly, that you need to see what the state law is on open meetings. But most states require open meetings that are going to be closed. Like we're talking to city council, maybe.
Right.
So if they're going to have a closed meeting, they have to have announced it, in some cases 24 hours ahead of time. And they need to say what the topic is that they're discussing. They can't just say personnel. They would have to say, personnel involving the hiring of a new city manager or something like that. They have to be pretty specific in most states. What state are you in?
Virginia.
Ooh, I'm sorry. No, but I mean, Virginia actually has a very good person you should get to know named Megan Ryan, who is head of I can give you her contact after, but there is a Coalition for Open Government in Virginia. I'm not sure if it's formally called that, but they do stuff on open records and open meetings, and it's a nonprofit. A lot of states actually have organizations like that, but they can't just go have a private meeting. They have to announce it. They have to vote on it. Any votes that they might have taken in the private meeting need to be disclosed. There are a lot of requirements in most states about that, but it's widely abused. And if you don't know what your rights are as a member of the public, never mind as a reporter, they'll just get away with it. So,
Thank you.
Sure. Okay, where were we? So, police and sheriff's departments, most of what they do, they're going to say investigative, it's under investigation, we can't give you anything. So you really need to press them. This is something where you got to keep going back every week. You need to develop sources. There are plenty of people in law enforcement who will leak, especially if they think something's really gone terribly wrong. Source development, I can't say enough for it. I put that over for you. I mean, you just need to get to know everybody on your beat and spend time with them when you're not asking for something too. Have coffee, ask them about their job. Not that I know people are very pressed for time, but this really comes back to roost when you need something from them. Charter schools is a really interesting issue. Arizona set up a board that somehow they privatized and said to run the charter schools in the state, and they have exempted them from most disclosure. And that's public money being spent on charter schools. I mean, I don't get that. I don't know how that hasn't been challenged legally, but it's very hard in Arizona to get information about charter schools. Massachusetts also has restricted it, but there was a successful lawsuit in which information about charter schools now has to be disclosed. Charter schools are really interesting. I mean, they're you really need to look at not only how the money's being spent, but what the performance is of the schools, and are they doing better than the public schools, and is it because they're not taking every kid like the public school has to, or is it because they're doing great stuff? Denise had mentioned audits. I would also say if you're looking at public universities and community colleges, all of which are publicly funded, that you should ask for their accreditation reports. You can also ask that from private universities. Sometimes they'll give it to you. I mean, you should go in with the presumption that everything you want is public and let them defend why they shouldn't give it to you. Economic development agencies, which are quasi-public, quasi-private, very tricky. A lot of states have set these up, frankly, I think to evade disclosure. But they do enough with public funds that you can make a very compelling case that you should be able to get, their reports, their expense accounts, how they're spending money, the consultant that they paid, any of that stuff. You should ask for it. You should ask for it routinely. And these guys should see you coming and know that okay, it's the first quarter, the end of the first quarter. I want this, and this. Just more things. Audits, 911 records and tapes. Sometimes you can't get them until an investigation is over. Anything that's played in the courtroom, by the way, is public. Anything, unless the judge does something to make it private. Text, depending on the state right now, sometimes text messages are being withheld back as not a public communication. There's a case in Texas that said that emails and texts were public, and then there's one in California that's still bubbling up that said sometimes text messages are private. I mean, anybody in the public domain, whether or not they're using their personal cell phone or their government-issued cell phone, if they are communicating about public business, that should be public, and I think that's ultimately where that issue will end up. Campaign finance reports, I love them. I mean, they're just a font of information about local government. And I'm serious about cross-checking contracts with campaign finance. I mean, even in clean Maryland, there was a bunch of votes at the county council, and 3 days later, some developer poured money into a little thank you to the people who had voted their project. Quid pro quo, and let them defend it. Ask them, just juxtapose the information.
Who do you ask for campaign finance reports? The local municipality?
Depends. That's a good question. So it depends on the state. In Maryland, there is a statewide database. But there are also some municipalities that also keep them. And so in Montgomery County, one of the suburbs of DC where I worked, there was the state database, but you could also go in and see, there was a requirement that the council members, if they had an issue pending and were getting like a development issue, that's usually what this is all about, development, traffic, and schools, right? They had to file a form saying that they'd gotten this report, this donation. So you can ask. I mean, you should ask the municipality and ask them what they keep. And that stuff, depending on the state, should be digitized. But Maryland, interestingly enough, was the last state to digitize its legislators' financial disclosure forms. Believe it or not, if you wanted to see one, you had to drive to Annapolis, Maryland, and get the hard copy. They just changed that a year ago. I mean, it's just unbelievable to me. But, it's the way a lot of legislatures are. Salaries is another thing to ask about, yeah.
Sorry, maybe we can go to this, but what are P3s?
Oh, public-private partnerships.
Oh, okay.
So, and those are also, on the edge where governments will say to you, oh my God, well, we can give you this, but it's all redacted. Or we can give you this and no, or not redacted. One of the issues that I've bumped into in my reporting is that trade secrets is an exemption to disclosure in most state public information laws. And guess what? Everything's a trade secret now. There was a case in California that I wrote about of a labor group wanted to get the results of what a company that had gotten a bus contract in LA, they'd promised to hire locally. So the nonprofit labor-backed organization wanted to see if in fact they had fulfilled that promise, which of course you would hope that the transit authority was doing a little enforcement and checking, but they weren't. So the company, which was a Canadian company, bus company called New Flyer, resisted this disclosure and said that the information that they were being required to give about who they were hiring and what they were paying was actually a trade secret. we're like, wait a minute, you used this to get the contract. You got extra points on this contract for agreeing to do this, and now you're saying you can't get that? And the transit authority did not defend the state disclosure law. They just stood back. And so this nonprofit had to intervene and defend the state law, which they did, and they won, and now, they're getting all the documents, but it took years. And, that's a public contract. Why would that, a promise made to win a public contract, why would that not be disclosable? Were you going to ask a question over here? You had your, okay. So the trade secret exemption is widely used, and I think widely abused, but it's something to be aware of that you're going to bump into, especially in contracting. And you need to get them to narrow. One of the things the governments do, by the way, is they don't know what's a trade secret, right? So they show it to the contractor. They show your request to the contractor and say, here, redact whatever you want to redact. And I found a case in West Virginia. It was a water case where the contractor had redacted the 800 number of the State Public Utilities Commission. It's stupid stuff like that. So be aware that, the government is basically handing off that function to the contractor, telling them to redact whatever, giving it back to them, and then they're giving it to you. And so you need to really push back on that stuff because, there are absurd examples of things that are being withheld. And again, this is public money. That's the best argument you have, to make sure that tax money is being properly spent. That's what it's really about.
The work you've done compiling your spreadsheet, database.
Yeah.
Nationwide, do you actually get the sense that there are many states who are hiring people who actually have an interest in open access and transparency? Or are they just filling seats for people who could easily fill a seat in some other agency?
Yeah, that's really a good question. I did do a lot of Freedom of Information Act requests at this in Prince George's County, Maryland, where I said there was this lawyer whose full-time job was to wreck my career. And, she admitted to me she hated doing FOIAs. It's very tedious. They are at risk, like in the case of, I don't know if you caught this, but this Democratic candidate for Congress in Virginia, the Postal Service accidentally gave out her background check, confidential information. I guess it was her security clearance background check. That was a mistake. They made a mistake. And that's what a lot of people are fearful of. I had a lawyer say to me, when in doubt, don't give it out. And that's the way they think, I think. I think it's a hard push for public disclosure. I think it's a constant battle. And you're right, I don't think people are necessarily on the government side in it because they love FOIA. And it's a pain. It's hard work for them. But tough luck. You're paying their salary, don't forget that. So this goes back to my argument about, or my plea for beat reporting, and how to go about finding out what's available. Get a tour, again, find these people in the bureaucracy who have a little spare time and who will be willing to talk to you about their work and what they do and what they have. Find out in general what is available, what can I get just because I walk in and I can get it. You will find also sometimes they'll treat members of the public more kindly than they'll treat you. I would hang around some of these offices sometimes to see how that goes because, I would go in and they'd say, oh, well, you're a reporter, you got to file a FOIA, and so-and-so, developer over here gets the documents like that. And the record retention schedule, I think, is really important. Find out what they keep and how long they keep it for. Fees are a big problem, as you may have discovered, and that Massachusetts State Police, some lawyer wanted information about drunk driving arrests. They wanted to charge him like $850,000 for this data, which they had. They had the data, and all they had to do was press a button and give it to him. But So fees are often used as a way to discourage you, and I think this is an instance where you can play the journalistic card a little bit and just say, look, what I do is in the public interest. Later on, you'll see there's some sample letters, and always when I was at the Post, we always said, I'm working for a general circulation newspaper, my request is in the public interest, it's blah, blah, blah. Sometimes they'll laugh at you, sometimes they'll say okay, and you can always talk them down on fees because they'll come up with an outrageous number like $850,000. Well, ask them, what's that based on? Oh, well, we have to have a lawyer look at it. Well, no, actually you don't. You can have somebody else pull it, do a keyword search, and then maybe at the end have a lawyer look at it. But the lawyer doesn't have to do the search. Somebody else can do that. But fees are a big, big barrier to disclosure, and you really, really have to push back. And if you are a small local news organization and you're the only voice in the community, I think that's all the more reason to play that card and say, I'm it. I'm your way of communicating with the public, and you need to be more forthcoming. Ask them, this is sort of along the lines of the record retention schedule. What are the regular reports that they have to make as a government? They have to report to the state. The state often has to report to the federal government. Sometimes the municipality has to report to the federal government. There are a lot of reports that they do on a regular basis that, again, with the push of a button, you could get. It would be nice if they put these on their websites. They generally don't. But you can, ask them, what are their regular reports? And, when do they file them? When taxes are due. When property taxes are due. When do they do an accounting of that? So that's something else. And then also, how are these reports recorded and stored? Do they have them in spreadsheets? Do they have them digitized so that you can get them? I had a government, I asked for the salaries because I wanted to see, salaries are always a good story. And they gave them to me in a non-searchable PDF, and they did it on purpose. I was like, wait a minute, come on. This can go into an Excel spreadsheet, and you've got it in the Excel spreadsheet. They spent time, making it hard for news Prince George's. Colleague back there knows this. Financial documents, contracts, bonds, anything that backs up payments to vendors. So I once did a story about contracting for public relations in a community that had 5 paid public relations people on their staff, but they still had a $200,000 contract with Judy Smith, who the TV show Scandal was based on. I was like, what are they paying her for? They have all these people. And so I asked for her invoices, which of course, they gave them to me after 30 days. And the invoices said nothing. It said services rendered or something like that. Who knows what she was doing? Probably nothing. But those documents the documents that are behind the contracts, behind the checks that are written, ask for the supporting documents. You're entitled to those. Elected official expense accounts are always worth a look. And do it regularly so they know you're looking.
When you go back to the background for the documentation for the documents it's supposed to be provided, do you find that generally starts the process all over again, starts the count all over again?
The delay, you mean?
Yeah.
That process? Yeah, this is a tricky thing. You want these people to help you. They're holding the cards. You're not really, unless you're going to sue them, which I would, think is unlikely. I would just say, look, this is part of my original request, so can we just move it along? It's better for you, it's better for me, we'll get it done. But they can run the clock a lot. I had a request in last year to the Department of Justice, right around now, actually. Federal government's supposed to reply, I think, in 10 days, and then maybe they have another 20 days, 6 months. But the lawyer in this department, it was the immigration agency within the Department of Justice, oddly enough pronounced Eeyore, they pronounce it, but he actually tried to help me. He was trying hard to help me, and so I didn't raise hell about it, although it really, it delayed my story for a long, long time. But, he was like, okay, we'll get that. Then he got that, and it wasn't the actual document I asked for, so I asked again. And he went back and he found it. I mean, I think it's a very imperfect science. So if you find somebody who wants to help you, I would go easy on the time frame if you can.
You just made a distinction between reply and comply.
Reply and comply. Oh, yeah. Reply is the first thing they have to do. All they have to do is acknowledge, usually, that they got your request. It doesn't mean they have to fulfill your request. So, and they can take a long time. And, depending, again, if these people like you, this is like anything else in life. It's all about personal relationships. That's what journalism is actually about. It's trying to get people to give you stuff that they don't want to give you, right?
Is that universal? That the 10 days is to say, I got your email?
It depends. It's pretty typical. And 10 days is low, actually. I mean, a lot of states are 20, 30.
Well, yeah, like it's different jurisdictions.
Right.
Like in Illinois, I think it's 5 days.
I had to sue the FDA once and waited 3 years for them to acknowledge my request.
Yeah, I mean, it's awful. I mean, at that point, you got to write a story if it seems.
I'm a complainant in a public records complaint with our state agency that's going on about 3 years now. The case it was about has actually already been resolved, and the person who was involved is actually now out of jail, having served a sentence already.
Yeah. No, yeah. It's you just have to keep at it. I mean, I really do think you have to get these sources trained. That you're going to keep coming back, and you're going to keep coming back, and you're not giving up. And even if it's 3 years, you're not going away. I mean, they need to get that imprinted in their brains. This privatization of the functions of government is something to really be on the alert for, because this is happening a lot, and a lot of governments are using it to say it's no longer in the public domain. One of the worst examples I've seen is police data where they're plotting, they're mapping hotspots. And a lot of that, they're giving the data, many police departments are giving the data to private companies, which are doing the maps for them, giving it back to them for free. It's their money is, Walmart, other big companies buy that data to decide where to locate, to decide, whatever, a bunch of different kinds of decisions. So what's happened is there's a delay often in getting that data because the private contractor is holding on to it, or the government is saying it belongs to the private contractor, which is just awful. But it's something to look for and see what is being contracted out. A lot of governments do not have the software, they don't have the capacity, they don't have the staff, whatever, to do these functions. And they're, the next thing, that's what charter schools are. That's contracting out public schools, actually. So I just put it out there as something to think about. The other thing, and I'm actually working on a story about this, so if you have interesting examples, I'd love to hear about them. But public universities are doing a ton of privatizing, and by doing that, they're isolating these things, whether they're research entities or something else, and then not talking about who's being hired, how they're being hired, where the money's being spent. Oh, it's all Koch brothers is one of the big ones. Is all Koch brothers money. So this is being litigated actually in Virginia, George Mason University, and so far which George Mason's a public university. So far, the forces for disclosure are lost. It was also in Florida, and what was happening was the Koch brothers were designating who could be hired, what professors could be hired with this money. And, needless to say, they sort of adhered to a certain view of the economy and libertarianism and whatever. And this wasn't being disclosed. And in Florida, they lost out, but I don't know how that's going to go in Virginia. Anyway, it's an interesting issue. One just, if you're looking for story ideas to keep your eyes out. So where to go for help? Because I don't think, you're going to be paying $500 an hour to a lawyer to litigate this for you. First of all, you can learn to do this yourself. If you need to go to court, there are, these organizations, first of all, will help you. They will also help you draft a complaint. I know reporters who have done this and succeeded at it. I would not hesitate to do it. And, you know, hopefully your employer can at least pay the filing fee if you're going to represent yourself. There are some states, a few states, like that example in Illinois, we saw how successful that was not, but that do have ombudsmen. Indiana actually has a guy who is very, very good at this. They don't pay attention to him. His rulings have no teeth, but he diligently manages these complaints from people, you know, and a lot of complaints on FOIA are actually not from journalists. They're from companies who are doing a lot of the filing of FOIA. And, you know, he writes opinions, and mostly they're ignored, as was the case in the Notre Dame police case where ESPN wanted to get the arrest records of football players because they thought they were being treated with kid gloves by the Notre Dame police. And, you know, the Notre Dame police carry guns, and they are certain, you know, they're empowered by the state, so you could argue that they were state actors, and that even private police forces at private universities are state actors, but Indiana didn't think so. And so even though the state ombudsman said it should be considered public record, the state Supreme Court did not go along with that. However,
Does an agency have to have a policy for how they handle FOIA requests? Do they have to have a printed policy? I'm dealing with an agency that claims to have this funky FOIA policy, and I said,
what state is this?
Illinois. I live here in Illinois. And it's a local police department that's saying that in order to get any records at all that I have to FOIA them. And I said, that's your policy? She said, that's the chief's policy.
Yeah.
And it's the practice, but it's, so I said, all right, well, let me see the policy.
Well, yeah, I mean, you know what, I would do the FOIA and just say, look, you know, I should be able to walk in here and get this. I'll write it out for you since you're keeping a record and that's what you want, but you gotta give it to me now. You know, I mean, those are very big annoyances, but, and a lot of these policies are, you know, they're not required, but it's sort of what they do.
Yeah.
And a lot of it is self-protection, you know, they're afraid to give something out or they're hiding something. But, you know, I would just try to say, look, okay, but the law says this, that I'm entitled to this in X number of days, so I'll write it out since that's what you want, but, you know, let's make this as fast as possible. I mean, again, I think a lot of it is one-to-one negotiation as much as you can try to do it and get them to like you, which is hard.
Yeah, I tried that, it didn't work.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. Your local bar says, yeah, go
I
ahead.
don't know if this is common, but in Michigan, the law allows if you sue under FOIA and you win, that your lawyer.
Get legal fees.
So there's groups of lawyers in
Yeah.
Michigan who will take cases for free.
Yeah.
Regardless if it's a good case, because they'll just make money.
Yeah, that's state by state.
They're good because they know the law.
Yeah. That is state by state. A lot of states don't have that, unfortunately, and so that's also a
They're kind of
big.
ambulance chasers, but they're awesome.
Yeah.
Because they know the law really well.
We'll
They're
take
going from
Journalist
police for you.
chasers.
They set it up as a lawsuit case for you, so you
Yeah.
can still get your stuff without a lawsuit.
Yeah, and that, I mean,
Once the city sees their name, they can just give you.
that's true. I mean, lawsuits do have a lot of power, you know, it does instill fear, and it can. So anyway, and I guess I'm pretty old school, but I actually printed this out, so you guys can have this list. But, you know, there are a lot of places to go for help, and you should use them. And SPJ has been trying to sort of step up their game in this, and they're right here in Indiana. You should let them know when you're having problems. But I was also going to say the local bar association, you know, just like you said, either if there's an incentive for a lawyer to take it, or they want to do some pro bono work because they're required to as members of the state bar, which is true in every state. You know, it was interesting when I was in Indiana. I had encouraged the student newspaper where I was teaching to go get their own lawyer instead of having to rely on the university lawyer, because they were going to have, that person was going to have a conflict no matter what. I mean, because half the time the kids were at risk of getting sued because of something they wrote about the university. So we looked around. It was actually very hard in Indiana to find a lawyer who A, had the expertise and B, was willing to do this. So I think, they were going to go to the Student Press Law Center, which is a good place to go. Not for the grown-ups, but anyway, yeah, I would, see there are lawyers around. Sometimes lawyers for community associations have an interest in this too, or you and they might be looking for the same stuff. So that's something else to look at.
You can also reach out to the Reporters Committee. We can help you find
Ah.
a local attorney.
Yes, yes, and you're on my list.
Yeah.
So this is just, again, this is on here, sample request letters. Again, I would start with the human approach. I really would. I think and then, if they ask you for a letter because they are keeping track and they want to show their boss how many FOIAs they're doing every year because it's taking up time, you can give them a letter, but I think really going in and asking and trying to cultivate these sources is really important. And that's pretty much it. There's just tons of stuff out there that you ought to be able to get. All kinds of records, and I would make an inventory in your community and see, figure out what there is and make a schedule for how often you're going to ask for it, and try to befriend these people as much as you can. Those are probably my best tips. So, any other questions? Yes.
Are there any other rules about, because I'm getting rumbled, they haven't approached me yet, but I always bring my video cameras to all the public meetings, and I'm getting rumblings that they're going to try to do something to make sure that I can't have video cameras. They haven't approached me yet, though.
Yeah.
But
Do they record their meetings?
yes, they do.
And do they live stream them?
No, it's not live streaming. And then also one of the things is that there is, I have found evidence that they do edit, even though it's supposed to be official for the record.
What a surprise! Yes, I'm not surprised. Are we talking about like the city council room?
Bowling Green, the town council.
Yeah.
And then also.
So they're meeting in a public place.
Yeah.
There should be no barrier to photography.
Okay.
Courtrooms are different state by state, but the council chambers where the public is, where that should also they should not be able to do that. And if you see that coming, you should try to get some help, because that's just not right. Yeah.
So that is a formally report.
No. Well, and they're trying to scare you actually by sort of putting the message out there that maybe you'll just go away or tuck your phone in your pocket or something like that. It's a public meeting, it's a public meeting. And in fact, you're standing in if they're not live streaming it, which is pretty antiquated actually. Most places, it seems to me now, are we're creating some video record, but you're standing in for the public. I mean, people don't go to these meetings that last till midnight, except reporters, right? So, yes?
There is a situation in our town that we've heard about. We don't know that it's real. We have heard rumblings that there were some letters that got lost. And there are three parties. One is a state agency. One is the government service, GSA. And the third is the Department of Service Department. Where would you go first?
You mean lost in what sense? That the town no longer has them? Sure.
Yeah, nobody, there are rumblings that these letters existed, but now nobody knows where they are, who they are, what they are.
And do you know what you can ask for?
But that's the hard part.
Letters about, do you know what the topic is?
Yeah, it is about turning an unused hangar over to
the town. Yeah.
And
it's owned by the federal government?
Let's read that right out to it. It's a Navy hangar.
Yeah.
And it went from the Navy to the GSA without so much as a buy your leave to the town.
Yeah.
And I guess there are people who feel that it should have come to the town. And that's where the state agency.
Well, I would certainly ask the GSA because they manage government, federal property, right?
Yeah.
I tried the Pentagon, the Navy. I would certainly try the state agency, whatever it is. And I would try them all, but I would also ask around and see if you can narrow it down a little bit. But certainly the GSA, if they've done a transfer, even if it was for no money, there's got to be records of that.
It's under auction right now.
Yeah.
It went it went from nothing to an auction.
And what about your congressman?
Well, that's the next, this is
Would they
all,
help?
this all came out day before yesterday. So
I mean, would the House member help?
I would think, or the senator.
Yeah, I mean, the House
Yes.
member would know, should know, somebody in that office should know, unless they were somehow involved in some dirty dealing that they don't want to tell you about, but, yeah, I mean, I think I should try all of them, and I would call around and say, this is what I'm looking for, this, information about this project, how do I find it? I mean, I would call these agencies first and ask.
But to go to all three of them.
I would go everywhere,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, when I get my big award,
Yeah.
I will say, it is you. Wouldn't have done it without your
Well,
encouragement.
that's nice. But, Massachusetts, as I was saying earlier to one of your neighbors here, is one of the worst, actually, on public disclosure. And, the Trump administration is bad. I have to say the Obama administration was really bad, and people have sort of ignored that fact. I mean, the federal government has just been shutting down for 10 years now. So, anyway, anybody else? No? Okay, well, I want to stand between you and a glass of wine. And if you want this little cheat sheet, I'm happy to provide it.